All right, it's 2 past the hour. We're going to kick things off. Thank you all so much for joining us for this month's workshop. If you haven't guessed or figured it out, focusing on mobile apps. So welcome wherever you're joining us around the world. We'll be talking all things mobile, diving into updates to Sentry's mobile SDKs and see some best practices based on how Wix ships their best-in-class mobile apps. But before we get into the fun stuff, as always, if this is your first time joining one of our workshops, post your questions in the Q&A feature in Zoom. If your question is specifically for Neil or specifically for Lev, please try to indicate that. So, it helps us when we're prioritizing them in the background. If you see something that's already been asked that you also want to ask, just upvote it. I've already gotten the question. We will definitely be sending out a timestamped recording of today's workshop early next week at the very latest, so you can rewatch it in its entirety or jump to a particular section of interest very, very easily. And last thing, there's a one-question survey after this workshop. It's going to open automatically in your browser. Really appreciate it if you could answer it. It's going to help us make all the future workshops even better. Okay, so today's host from Sentry, you've probably seen his face before. Neil Manvar heads up our solutions engineering team. And joining us from Wix is Lev Vidrak. He is the mobile team lead at Wix. Quick agenda. We'll go through an introduction, as always, recap Sentry's pillars. Next, Neil will talk us through some mobile updates, specifically to the Flutter SDK. Then we'll dive into performance in mobile for React Native, for Android, and then we'll hear from Lev on how Wix uses Sentry, specifically monitoring React Native apps, their approach to releases, and how they think about monitoring mobile at scale through projects, ownership, context. And then we'll jump to a like it, improve it section, just kind of a back and forth between Neil and Lev, talking about things that Lev really likes about the product and things where he thinks could be improved. And of course, Q&A at the very end. So that's all for me. I'm going to pass it over to Neil to kick us off, and hope you all enjoy.
All righty. Thank you, Schaefer. Can everyone see my screen here? Should be the same agenda slide. All right. So as Schaefer mentioned, I'm going to go ahead and just recap our pillars. I'm going to be mainly talking about performance monitoring, and obviously we're going to be focusing on mobile today, but want to frame this all together so that we can identify to one of these pillars as that identifies our product offerings in different areas within our platform here. So as you all know, Sentry originated as an error monitoring tool, but now it does a bunch more, especially within our mobile SDKs that we're going to talk about today. But at the core of it, Sentry tells developers and folks that need to know about their application that it's broken, it has crashes via error monitoring. We tell you where the slowdowns and bottlenecks are, whether it's on the front end or back end, and also relate that to any errors via our performance monitoring offering. And Release Health tells us how our build or release is doing out there in the wild. Is it being adopted? Are there crash-free sessions? Are there errors that I need to know about? And it gives you that dashboard to understand how your releases are doing, especially in a mobile world where you put it out to the App Store and folks adapt as they choose to upgrade. Discover is our query platform that allows you to find any of the answers via any of the events that you're sending, allows you to pivot on that data, query it, filter it, display it, all of that stuff. Integrations, making sure that you can be alerted, whether it's Slack, PagerDuty, or file the issues in Jira. And then we obviously have our integrations platform that allows you to extend on this. Like I said, today's going to be focusing on mobile, 3 different SDKs mainly. We're gonna show how to integrate the SDKs and get all of these things wired up, whether it's error monitoring, performance monitoring, Release Health, same SDK. Just got to make sure the events, transactions, and sessions are being sent up here. So let's get started. I'm really excited because we have 4 big announcements here, 3 of them regarding SDK stuff, and then 1 of them regarding a new way to debug, which I'm kind of excited to present you here. I'm going to be going pretty fast here, and I'll take questions at the end, as Schaefer mentioned. So first things first, we have a new Flutter SDK. So Flutter developers, we hear you. It's getting more and more popular. We may even be using Flutter to create our own mobile app in the background to learn more. But point being is we have a first-class Flutter SDK that does error monitoring and release health with performance coming soon at some point. I'm going to go ahead and showcase this. We'll go ahead pretty quickly here. So let's go to the docs here, go to Flutter. Our SDK docs now have these features at the top, which really helps you understand what's going on. So in addition to surfacing issues within Dart, we also will surface issues in the Java Kotlin layers and C, C++ for Android, and for iOS, the Objective-C, Swift, and the C layer as well. In mobile, you're obviously going to have the offline storage of events because we don't know if you have a connection or not. The context will be set as such, and breadcrumbs will capture via the native SDKs via Android and iOS, as well as the HTTP requests via Dart. And obviously, you can customize the breadcrumbs. Release health is going to be included by default here with Flutter under the hood. So just go ahead, upgrade, and you'll see sessions being sent up as well. And there is just some requirements here. So how do I get implemented? I'm going to showcase this in my app as well, in addition to the docs. So in pubspec.yaml, just specify our SDK. And then in your main, we're going to do sentry.init and the DSN, and then things will be sent up here. So if I go ahead and take a look here, here is the configuration here. I have some of the variables set up here. And then in my pubspec.yaml, I have Sentry SDK specified here. So now that all of that's configured, we can just show that release health is also on. It's going to be on by default. And if you want to disable it, you can do so by setting this to false as well. Alrighty, so now that this is configured, let's just go to Sentry and take a look at a few different Dart issues. So if I go ahead to releases, Flutter, sorry about that. Let's go to our Flutter project here. Now clicking on this, I can see that I have some issues, and here is my release health information. And let's go to the issues page for further debugging here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up some of these. And what we can see here is here's one occurring at the Kotlin layer. Here's a stack trace. All of the context is you as expect. Here's one occurring at the native layer where it's crashing within some C++ code and it's been symbolicated. And here is the symbols that were applied. And then we have our Dart code as well. So you'll see the stack trace that you expect as well. Here's a more fulfilling Dart stack trace as well. All right. So that was just a real quick preview and recap of our new Flutter SDK. We're really excited about it, and it follows a unified spec just as all of our other SDKs do. Let's get on with the other announcements. And the bulk of my time is going to be spent on this one here. React Native now supports performance. So go ahead, pull in our SDK, just specify the performance config, which I'll go over shortly, and transactions will be shot up. In addition to telling you what's broken, are folks adopting your release properly? We're going to be able to tell you the slow transactions, the failing transactions, and link this all together. So let's go through this just like we did for Flutter. So I'm going to go back to the documentation here. I'm going to go to React Native, and let's go over what the features are real quick. So obviously we got error tracking, the offline storage, context is going to be surfaced as such, breadcrumbs, auto linking, right? So we don't have to manually link as part of the setup process, release health, performance monitoring, which we'll get into in just a bit. And our React Native SDK is a superset of actually a lot of SDKs. It's their JavaScript SDK, or Android SDK, or iOS SDK, and anything underneath that as well. We're going to symbolicate as necessary, and we support Hermes, Expo, and the RAM bundles as well. So let's get set up real quick. And once again, side by side, I'm going to showcase my code, and then we'll take you through this. So first, we're just going to get set up with the SDK in regards to errors and releases, and then integrate performance and talk about what we're seeing and what's happening under the hood here. So here we have the documentation on the left and the code on the right. I've already installed the package. So if I go into package.json, we can see right here that I've installed the relevant packages, and we got to include Sentry React Native and Sentry tracing. And then next, since I'm using one of the more recent versions of React Native, we can go run the wizard, which will do a number of things. So one, it'll instrument Android accordingly. It'll instrument Cocoa accordingly. It'll add the build steps for Android and iOS so that the symbols are shot up, and that's going to be done via our Gradle plugin via Android, and it's going to be done via hooking into the build phases and using the Sentry CLI tool to upload. And this is all going to happen under the hood to get those symbols to us. So let's go ahead and run the wizard real quick. And what's going to happen is it's going to pull up a browser, and it's going to take me to it's going to pull in my settings here. And I'll get to choose my project and the type, and it'll instrument accordingly. And while that's happening, I'm going to keep going through the documentation here. And in terms of instrumentation, in our app.js, we're going to do sentry.init and then the DSN. So let's go, oh, here we go, the selector. So here, choose this one, and there we go. And then in my app, I have sentry.init, the DSN, and this is all that's required for error monitoring. And I also want to get set up with release health. So I'm going to go into here, go over here. I'm going to specify the release version. And in addition to that, we want to specify this right here so that sessions are set to Sentry. And that's what we have right here. And now at this point, we're set up with errors and sessions. So if we go to Sentry, and let's go to my project. At this point, we're going to have the session information here and the errors as such. Next, we want to get the new offering in place, and this is the performance piece. So let's go ahead and check out the documentation and go from there. If I go to performance monitoring and then go to setup, it gives me the instructions right here. So it's just integrations, new Sentry native tracing, and then the tracing origins, which is basically which transactions I want to have Sentry tracked. So here in my case, I want anything that's going out to HTTPS to be tracked so that I know if those are causing slowdowns to my customer experience. And then we have traces sample right here, just to make sure how many transactions we want sent up. For demo purposes, I'm using 100%, but you can sample this down as necessary. And then to do dynamic sampling within the SDK, you can use traces sampler and operate on that data accordingly to sample so that you can sample different things at different rates and accordingly. So I have this all set up. The other thing with, oh yeah, with actually Flutter as well that I forgot to mention, and React Native, which I did mention, is that the symbols are being sent up and that's all taken care of. In Flutter, I used the Sentry CLI to shoot up the symbols as such. But we are set up here for errors and release health. And now we are set up for performance here as well by integrations and use the Sentry React Native tracing. And we're specifying which things we want to trace. And additionally, we see here the routing instrumentation. I'm going to cover that shortly in just one moment because that is part of our included instrumentation. So by default, we are going to create a child span for any XHR or fetch. And we are also going to track the routing instrumentation. So I'm going to go ahead, scroll down into here, and this is what we're doing here. via routing instrumentation. Since I'm using React Navigation v5, I'm going to go ahead and follow those instructions. But basically, we support v5 and v4, and we'll have more support in the future. And if you don't, go ahead and use our custom instrumentation and go ahead and track it. But here, if we go ahead and view this, what we want to do here is create this routing instrumentation and specify it as part of our integrations. And then on anything that we want to track, so this will automatically track navigations and create transactions accordingly. But we're going to want to track more stuff as well, right? We're going to want to know our React components when they're mounting, when they're rendering, and such. So just with this, what we're going to see out of the box, let me go ahead and show you. So if I go ahead to performance and go ahead to my React Native project here, I can see my home transaction here, and it'll just be the navigations and any XHRs that happen. I jammed a button to basically create a bunch of XHRs, but we can see exactly what's going on there. We want to see much more than that, right? We want to see what's happening in React land and what's going on there. So that's why we're going to do a little bit of more instrumentation here. So if we go down to the bottom here, we can hook in the React profiler here. So when we are exporting our components, we just want to wrap it with Sentry.with_profiler, and we're going to be good here. So let me go ahead and show you what I've done in this case. So my app here is this guy right over here. And what I want to do is be able to go ahead and generate a transaction for all of this information and understand what's going on. So this is a new navigation screen that popped up. I'm hitting an API, which is rendering this information. So there's some React activity happening. So if I go ahead to my code here, I go to tool store, or sorry, tracker stream. What we see here is that we've specified Sentry.with_profiler on the tracker screen, and we've also done it with the subcomponents as well. So now let's take a look at what we see here. So if we go ahead to performance, we have our tracker screen here. Just go ahead to the last 24 hours. And now here, we have a bunch of these transactions. And we can see the navigation where we got it onto the tracker. You can see the React mount. We can see the XHR. And all the mounts and renders of any of those components that we've instrumented with that profiling. So now this is a lot of useful information, right? I'm seeing that 59% of my time is being spent on XHRs and fetches or in HTTP land. About 40% is being spent within renders, and the mounting is very little here. But this is giving me an understanding of exactly what's happening in my app. Now, if we're also using Sentry on the backend, we can go ahead and click into here, and it would say view span and go into there. So that's really going to allow you to understand whether the slowdown is on the front end or back end and be able to trace that end to end. So in summary here, we've been all wired up with performance on React Native. And now we can all see this within one screen on the release health page, where we see the related errors, any of the frequent transactions or failing transactions or slow transactions, and we can go ahead and dive in from there, going into the appropriate data set, understanding what's broken and what's slow, and how my release is behaving in React Native. And I have one more thing to show you outside of React Native. But before I do that, there's a really good blog post that one of our developers wrote about how they've used performance monitoring as well. So here it goes through the instrumentation, it goes through how to instrument promises, and it shows a bunch of other custom instrumentation and using the transaction hub to make sure that that we can get all of our transactions surfaced and that we're passing around the appropriate information and retrieving the appropriate information when necessary. So I'll leave everyone with that in the notes as well. but we have one more announcement, and then I'm going to hand it over to Lev, or two more, but they're both regarding, I'm going to show them in Android. So we now support performance within Android as well. There's only some degree of auto instrumentation. We're going to add a bunch of more stuff there, but we have the APIs. You can create custom instrumentation. You can surface transactions, and we have auto instrumentation on the activity level, and you're going to see a lot more coming there, just like you've seen with the other frameworks and such. So I'm going to go ahead and demo this real quick, and then I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Lev, or this in attachments. So here with Android, setup is pretty simple. In our build.gradle, let me go ahead and pull up the code side by side once again. In our build.gradle, we go ahead and specify Sentry, and I've done that as such. And then we want to set our DSN as well in our Android manifest. Android manifest. I've done that as well. And now let's go ahead and set up release health, which is pretty simple. So if I go into here, it's going to be automatically enabled, but we can opt out of it. And let's go ahead and check our Sentry and init code as well. So sorry about that. Right here, sentry.init. And we have everything configured here. So it's just going to have errors and sessions turned on by default. And lastly, we want to set up performance monitoring here. So we go into here, set up the traces sample rate as we're used to in the Android manifest once again. And that's done so right over here. And we're all set. So next is just the included instrumentation. So I mentioned by default, we're going to capture the activities, and there's going to be more coming here. And then we have the custom instrumentation as well. So this is pretty easy. This is just start transaction and then finish it. And then when you have any spans, you can set those as well. So if we take a look here, you can retrieve the span using sentry.getSpan, and then start child and track accordingly as well. I mentioned how to retrieve a transaction, which is the sentry.getSpan. And we'll automatically connect any errors with spans as well. So this is pretty universal in any of our performance offerings, right? We're showing you the transaction. If there were any related errors, you'll also see that correlated in the interface. So I'm all set up here. So I'm going to go ahead to my Android project, and let's go ahead and start kind of looking at things here. Android. Go ahead and look at release 1.7. And let's just look at this at the high level. So before the performance update, once again, I would have only seen the session information and the issue information. But now I'm also going to see the transaction information. So I'm going to go ahead, head over to performance. Let's take a look at one of these activities. And these are going to be pretty plain by design. So it's going to have the navigation and then any of the spans that you did from there. And let's go ahead and also look at some of the custom instrumentation that we've done here. So here we're tracking activity loads, and then the checkout is going to be the more interesting one here. Here is a HTTP request that we are tracking via manual instrumentation, and we can see that there are errors as part of the span, and we can then go ahead and dive into there. But now, all in all, we have performance data being sent up to Sentry. There's going to be more auto instrumentation, like I mentioned, but this is what we got for now so that you all can get started in understanding slowdowns in Android land, in addition to just what's broken and release adoption. Last thing that I want to show is our attachments capabilities. Let's pull up my little event link for that. We'll go in from there. And have you ever found yourself, debugging and you're like, hey, Sentry gives me a bunch of context, right? The stack trace, the breadcrumbs, it gives me all of the structured information that's in an aggregated format. But it would be great if I had the screenshot of, what the user experience was. It would be great if I had some extra log file or, a copy of the local database or something like that in the case of mobile. Well, now you can attach attachments to your events, and we'll go ahead and store them so that you can understand what crashed, what went wrong, and what was the state of things via any of those attachments. So this is really easy to use. You're just going to go ahead and just add the attachment to the scope, and it'll get up and running. So let's go ahead and take a look at this in Android land real quick. So if we go into here and go into here, attachment. Here, what I'm doing is creating an attachment right here. It's a temp file. And here, I'm writing out some JSON to log.json, and I'm doing sentry.configure scope, scope.add attachment. And let's look at the result of this here. So if I go to Sentry once again, we're there. Go ahead and take a look at this issue. If I scroll down here, right, what I will see is the attachment, the log.json and that temp file. If this was a previewable file, I could click preview and kind of see what's going on directly with this interface. Otherwise, go ahead and download and additionally triage. So very useful for understanding, what the current state was. If the structured information or any context that you've attached here is not going to tell you, and it might be a longer form that you should attach as well. So that is it in regards to announcements. So just to recap here, what we've covered so far are 4 things. Showed y'all how to get started with Flutter in regards to errors and release health. We just got performance within React Native. We went over the instrumentation there, showed you all what it takes to get wired up. And then we looked at some sample transactions in terms of the page load and the activity tracker screen, which was a lot of React mounting and React rendering and XHRs and understanding what was actually going on in a more convoluted, populated screen there. We now have performance monitoring for Android. There is some auto instrumentation. We're going to be adding a bunch more, but you can go ahead, use our manual instrumentation and track anything as necessary, and you're going to get the same type of love from our platform and understanding in regards to what's going on within your app. And lastly, attachments, right? I showed you that you can attach onto our events via the SDK, sentry.configure scope, scope.add attachment, so that we can further understand exactly what was going on. Now it's time for Lev's piece, and I'm super interested here because it's more about the application of all of this stuff, right? How you actually are able to work with the React Native app that's used by many, many people at scale. So go ahead, Lev. I'm going to hand it over to you, man.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks. Actually, I want to start from answering one of the questions, which is directly related to the transactions, I think. And there is a question about the best way to filter out false positive errors. And I think one of the things that transactions can help is you can mark the KPI that are important for you. And if the percentage of successful transaction is going down, you will be able to look on the errors that connected to that transaction. And this is something we're not using transactions, Sentry transaction, because it's a new feature, but hopefully we will do. We have some internal tool that we're using for the same idea. We just mark important KPI and success rate of them and how long they took. But the problem is that it's not connected to Sentry, so I have no idea what errors occurred during the certain transaction. So now with this thing, it will be amazing. And also the attachments are very, very cool. Will they work in React Native?
Sorry, what again, Lev?
The attachments.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's also for,
yeah, let me go
it's
ahead.
also for iOS.
Yeah, it is for iOS as well. Let me go ahead and
Cool.
share my screen again and show you exactly where it's available. I should have covered that. That is a good point. So here we have it for iOS, Android, Java, JavaScript, native,
Cool.
Xamarin.net.
Cool. Amazing. So I'll start from a few words about Wix and what are we doing in mobile, because we are mostly familiar, like people know us as a website builder, and we're famous in this area. But actually at Wix, we are building a framework for managing businesses end to end, whether it's to manage your customers, manage your payments, social campaigns, etc., etc. And in Wix, we have a mobile app. We have several mobile apps. One app is for managing your business on the go from the phone. And the second app is mostly for users of our users. So they will be able to interact with their Wix-based businesses and to create some kind of community around these businesses. And we have another new app which called Fitness, Fit by Wix, which is targeted for also users of users that are members in some kind of gym or fitness club or something like that. So we have lots of code, lots of screens. We're around 100 developers working on these three apps, which are kind of based on the same code. And I will explain in a second how it works. We're working with React Native, and for those who are not familiar what is React Native and how it actually works, I will share my screen. Just a second. Yeah. Can you see my screen? Yeah, cool. Just a second. Where is the present button? Can you see the screen now?
Yep.
Yeah, great. So React Native, it's a framework by Facebook, which enable us to build mobile applications, native mobile application using JavaScript and React. And how it's actually built is, if we are looking on the React Native framework, it consists of two main layers. One layer is built with native code, with Java and Objective-C. And it consists of something that called native UI views, which is a wrapper around the UI views coming from the Android SDK and the iOS SDK that Google and Apple provide us. And something called native models, which are kind of wrappers around native functionality, non-UI APIs. For example, turn on Bluetooth, turn on camera, stuff like that. Above that, we have a layer of C++ that connects us to a JavaScript API that is exposed to a React Native developer. So the React Native developer is implementing his business logic, like what screen to show, what all the if and else. He is implementing this in JavaScript and invoking the React Native JavaScript API that under the hood translated to the native views and the native APIs. Unfortunately, React Native do not cover the whole Android and iOS SDKs, but we can extend this framework by adding native code and JavaScript API and using this API from the JavaScript layer. So in React Native, we have JavaScript code and we have also native code. And this is, on one hand, it's really cool that we can develop in JavaScript for both platforms. But in sense of monitoring, now we have errors in Objective-C, in Swift, in Kotlin, in Java, and in JavaScript. And the approach for monitoring when you work with JavaScript is a bit different, because when you have errors in native code, you have crashes. And when you have errors in JavaScript code, it just error in the JavaScript engine that executes the JavaScript code. It doesn't mean that the app will crash, just mean that you have an error in the JavaScript. And the fact that whole business logic is implemented in JavaScript, so you can say that you don't have many crashes. And this is what usually React Native application have. They don't have many crashes. Their crash rate is really, really good. A bit how it's executed, like the native code is compiled, like any native application, and the JavaScript bundled to JavaScript big file, let's call it like this, or JavaScript bundle. And then when we execute the app, the native code would be executed as any native application, and the JavaScript code will be executed by JavaScript virtual machine. And this is also important thing, because when we're working with React Native, by default, React Native execute JavaScript with an engine called Hermes. And not all monitoring system support this Hermes. So if you are picking a monitoring system, make sure they support Hermes, because your JavaScript code is minified. And when you have an error, you are sending an minified data to the monitoring system. And you need something called source map to translate this minified information to readable stack trace with normal function names and class names. And when we work with Hermes, the minified file is a bit different from the file that like usually used in Chrome or any other browser. So Sentry supports Hermes, which is pretty cool. A bit about Wix structure. Wix is a big company. As I said, we have 100 developers working on the same app, which is a big like it's not an easy task. And how it works, like, so Wix as a company, we're split to some kind of mini companies, and each mini company focus on specific set of features. So for example, we have Wix stores, and they develop features only for stores. And we have Wix bookings, they develop features only for businesses that need to book something, and they have calendar, for example, beauty salon, and etc. And in each company, we have server developers, web developers, and mobile developers. So we have lots of mobile developers spread across many, many teams. And when we work, we tend to work, like when we build our architecture, we'll build it in such way so every team will be able to work as much as possible independent in their release process, in their testing, in their development process, and also in their monitoring process. And I will jump to Sentry because this is directly related to this thing. So this is our Sentry configuration. And this is pretty, I think it's a new screen, for me at least. It's a nice screen. There are lots of information here. And I want to focus on this thing because it's really important for us. And this area, this section is actually a definition of teams inside the project. And I will explain in a second why do we need teams. So in Sentry, you can see here that we have lots of teams. And if I go to configuration, and project teams. Each team contains several members. I'll go back. And each time I have an issue or error, I can auto-assign issues to a specific team by these rules that we pre-configured. So in practice, how it works, if I go to issues, for example, just a second, I have here also predefined search configuration for each team. Let's go to events team and see their errors. So you can see that the assignee of each error here is the events team, and they're getting their own alerts and their notifications for these errors, and they're responsible for these errors. And if we go, for example, to this error, I don't know, we can see that this error was assigned to this team because in the rules of the ownership was configured that any issue with this string in the stack trace automatically will be assigned to that team. And we can see here in the stack trace that the first line in the stack trace is actually coming from that team. So they are responsible for that error. After that, they can assign it to a different team if they think that they are not responsible for this, or they are not the one to blame. Few words about releases. So here you can see all our releases, and we are releasing lots of versions per day. And why is like that? Because we are releasing lots of internal versions. Like every time someone from the 100 developers want to trigger a build, it will create a version for that person. And you can see that most of the releases are not, the adoption rate is not high because no one used them. But if I sort by, let's say, active users, you can see here real versions. And for example, this is version from today. And we saw that the crash rate of this version was a bit high. And let's try to dive in and understand why. And actually, this is from today. I can show you our Slack. Our release manager wrote, guys, this version has too many crashes, so I'm stopping it on 18% of Android penetration. We're not releasing directly to 100% of users. We're releasing it gradually on Android, exactly for that reasons, to catch to monitor and to catch problematic versions. And if we go to, usually I'm directly jumping to opening issues because it's much easier for me. And because first release, it's only new issues. And I can sort them by priority. Okay, and it was crashed, so I need also to sort by error level. Just a second, level. And as I said in the beginning, that in React Native, we can have JavaScript errors, which are actually errors, and they are not fatal. They are not crashing the app, and there are fatal errors, which are actually crashing the app. So in this case, I want to see the fatal errors. Okay. And let's try to understand it. I think this is the problematic was, and we can see that lots of users suffered from this issue, and And we can see here that it's coming from Stripe SDK, React Native SDK. So we know who to blame. And this issue, unfortunately, was not assigned to anyone because this is actually something missing in Sentry to assign issues for native native stack traces. But I know it's something in progress. Another cool thing that we're using is the breadcrumbs. So in breadcrumbs, we can see, first of all, if we look on the navigation, there are not much information about the navigation because the navigation that is auto-monitored here with breadcrumbs is native navigation. And maybe there is support for out-of-the-box React navigation, but we are using React Native navigation, which is a different library in React Native. So it's not automatically tracked by Sentry, but we are sending something like custom breadcrumb that called the screen shown event. And now we know that the person went to this screen before the app crashed. So it's really helpful. Another thing that is useful here is the HTTP request. Of course, you need to be careful and not send here some important information or sensitive information. But I know also there is a flag, so I'll be able to see the body of the post. And I somehow can turn it on, and then I will see the body of what we sent in the post request, which is pretty cool. What else I can show interesting? I think that's all. Neil?
No, that's very cool. Especially the breadcrumb part with, where you don't have enough context, so you go back and put in the context to make it easier every time going forward.
Yeah, well, like we're planning to add lots of stuff to the breadcrumbs. We also try to add the like touch events, but it's a work in progress.
Yeah.
We also, when we're working with error monitoring and Sentry, we have like this is our internal app for development, and we have here something called trigger errors, and we can trigger errors. Oh no, just a second, I'll turn on the red screens. Yeah, I can trigger errors, and you see these errors are not, they are not crashing the app, just errors, and we'll see them in a sec in the in Sentry. And something we added is called red screens, which in React Native in development you see lots of red screens, but when you have a production app or release app, let's call it release app, the errors are just sent to Sentry. But sometimes you want to see them in your release version. So we have this switch, and now if I trigger the app, the error, I will see an error, but the information here is minified, so I can't see the whole stack trace. So something we are working on is to send the Sentry event, get back the event ID, and fetch from Sentry the stack trace and show it here. And it will be pretty cool, or at least show the link so that, let's say, product manager will be able to click the link and go to the developer and say, dude, there is a bug here.
Yeah. Oh, that's very interesting. So it cuts down on kind of the whole reproduction side, where if the error happens live, it's not even, you need to go to Sentry or, reproduce it and then go from there. It's like, whoever the app owner or whoever encountered it, like here it is, it happened on app.js line,
and usually the QA and the product manager and also the developer, when he's playing with the release version, he has no idea what JavaScript errors he triggers. So we want these red screens to be shown in the QA cycle. So this is something cool, and we working on enriching this area more and more.
Yeah, yeah. You started at releases and our new project details page in terms of understanding, what is the overall state of things. Is that a pretty common workflow that you guys use? Is go in from here and then find the relevant issues, and then kind of go down and trace it from there?
Yes. Usually it's like that. Usually, for example, I have a bug, so I just write the version, trying to find it here, and dive from here. Another flow is, of course, from the issues, is to write some release number, or I don't know, some part of the stock trace or stuff like that.
Understood.
And of course, this thing is very helpful because the teams know like how to search exactly their own issues, and we can, like, if we see that there is something with lots of issues, we need to deal with this. And also something that we started, I don't know if it's configured or not. We're trying to configure alert rules per team. And these rules are sending alerts to Slack, and we need to fine tune it because we are getting too many alerts. This is something we are working on. So let's see if we have here something. So we are getting these kinds of messages, and then the team knows what to do.
Yeah, wow, cool. I also saw a couple metric alerts there as well. So it sounds like you guys are poking around in that area as well.
Yeah. And we're also thinking about building a bot that will monitor these alerts, will check from what version this alert sent, and will try to understand whether it's important alert or not. For example, if it's a version that is currently in production, it's like the high priority. If it's an old version that, I don't know, some user didn't update the app and it's crashed, like, we don't care. It's less important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting. So you're trying to curate it and add more context to essentially the alert, rather than, hey, this fired and bam, I see this.
Yeah. Something that is currently missing, but I know that it's in progress, is to identify internal releases, beta releases versus production releases. Which will be really, really cool. And then I will be able to filter, like, show me only the production releases and compare them, or something like that. And actually it can be done automatically by the adoption.
Yeah. And actually the project details page is going to be pretty useful for that as well, because you'll be able to go to a project and then specify for environment, and then releases will be, so it'll be kind of two ways to interact with that data, but releases and projects are going to be two different ways to see things in aggregate, just in actually, a different format.
When we started configure, like, something I didn't touch, but when you have let's call it multi-model architecture, that you have many models and each team is responsible for different model, you have two ways to work with Sentry. You can create one project and like put everyone to there, or you can create several projects, but then you need to maintain lots of configurations, and it's a bit heavy task. And not all the teams familiar with the configurations of Sentry. So we decided to create one project, and the environment we use for different kind of apps. Like, we have, as I said, 3-4 apps: admin, fitness, places, and we have here separation between development and production, between iOS and Android. So if I have an issue in Android admin app in production, so I will just do like this. So this is the app for the owners, and this is only issues in Android. And you see the loader because we have lots of issues.
Understood. Very interesting. Anything else, Lev, that you want to share regarding your Sentry experience? Because you've been using Sentry for a while, and
No, I think we are not using it enough. Like there are lots of new and cool features. For example, these stubs are really cool that we need to start working with. The performance, the transactions, there are lots of work for us to catch up and use all the cool features.
Awesome. No, we look forward to working with you, team. It's been great. I've been here for some time and worked with you and various members of your team for quite a while. Appreciate that. Anything else, Lev, that you want to bring up? Schaefer, otherwise,
yeah, let me get, because we got about 3 minutes here. I want to get to at least a couple questions. The first one and most upvoted one from John was, when using Sentry, and this kind of goes back to Lev was kind of mentioning this near the end of his section there. What's the best way to filter out false positive errors where the user experience is not affected?
Yeah. Good question. I'm going to take a stab at it and then give it to Lev if you want to comment. But all in all, Sentry only wants to ingest and accept your actionable errors. The mechanisms to help you here are there's going to be some client-side filtering, and then there's going to be a bunch of things that you can do on the server as well. So within Sentry.io, one of the things that you can quickly do is delete and discard. So if you see an issue that you never want to see again, go ahead and delete and discard it. That'll, one, delete it. Number two, send inbound filter for that fingerprint so you never have it accepted again. We also have inbound filters on the server side, and then we really don't want you to send those events that don't matter to you. So go ahead and in the before send callback of the SDK, go ahead and configure that behavior such that that type of error or whatever it is not sent up.
I think it's also related to the definition of what is an error and what is a warning. Like when you are writing your code, you need to think is this case is an error or a warning, and then you can relate only for two errors. For example, crashes are of course errors, and in my opinion, everything that is not interrupting user flow or a certain KPI that you want to achieve, it's a warning if it's not interrupted. You're supposed to know about it, but it's not very important. And transactions will be very, very helpful for that case.
Awesome. We've got 1 minute left. I'll ask just a quick one that a question had for, or a participant had for you, Lev, was what CI does Wix use to build their apps?
Okay. In CI, we are using TeamCity for managing our builds. For mobile, we are using Mac machines, our Mac machines, like we have data center, and we are using also Mac Stadium. Mac Stadium is a provider of Mac machines. And we have lots of internal tools for managing all the release flow, to check which models are release ready and which models are candidates ready and stuff like that.
Cool. One more for you, Lev. How do you split the Android from the iOS releases? Are these different projects in Sentry?
In Sentry, it's the same project, but different environments. Because most of the code, the business logic is the same. It's the same JavaScript code. The release process, we tend to release both Android and iOS at the same time. Sometimes we release like first Android, then iOS, but we tend to do it at the same day of the week.
Got it. Cool. We're at an hour. There were a ton of questions asked, so I'm sorry we didn't get to answer all of them as we normally do. I'll make sure to follow up with all of you that did ask a question, get you an answer. Thank you so much, Lev, for participating, and Neil, as always.
Thank you, guys. And if someone have a question, you are free to send me on Twitter. Just find me, Lev Vidrak, and DM me. I will answer. No problem. Try to help.
That's awesome. Thank you both. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We will have this recording up for you to review early next week at the very latest. Look out for an email. Until then, be safe, and we'll see you next month, hopefully.
Thank you, guys.